You know that feeling, don't you? You embark on a project, maybe it's that home renovation you've planned forever, or a big product launch at work, maybe even just trying to organize a big family get-together. You start out with this like amazing vision, right? Everything clicks perfectly, on time, under budget, exactly how you pictured it. And then reality kind of sets in. The delays start creeping up. Costs seem to just inflate out of nowhere. You have endless meetings that don't seem to decide anything. And there's that really unsettling feeling, that growing sense that maybe nobody's actually holding the reins, that no one really has the full picture. It's more than just frustrating, isn't it? It's genuinely perplexing, especially when you know there are smart, talented people involved. You're just left scratching your head thinking, how did we even get here? Well, today we're embarking on a really fascinating deep dive that explores exactly that feeling, but on a national scale. We're turning our focus to Germany. Now, Germany is a nation that, for decades, has basically been the global benchmark for efficiency, for precision engineering, cutting-edge innovation, and, famously reliable infrastructure. When you think German quality, you probably picture those impeccable cars, robust machinery, maybe a super punctual train system. Yet, the really comprehensive sources we're diving into today, they paint a remarkably different picture. And frankly, it's quite an uncomfortable picture of Germany's current reality. We're going way beyond the simple headlines, beyond just the latest economic figures. We're going to confront a really profound, almost existential question that our sources pose directly. And that question is, why does so much in Germany no longer seem to work?
We're talking about these huge public infrastructure failures that have become, almost national embarrassments. We're talking about a noticeable slide in global competitiveness, innovation that kind of stalls out before it can really scale up. And just this overarching sense of stagnation that really clashes with its historical strengths. Our sources for this deep dive, they're a highly detailed analysis and a comprehensive briefing document.
And they offer not just, a diagnosis of the problems, but a really profound cultural and ideological take on Germany's current state. They don't just list the symptoms, they dig deep into the why. They explore these underlying shifts in the societal fabric, in values and leadership approaches that have brought Germany to this crossroads. So our mission today, for you, the listener, is to pull out the crucial insights into what these sources are calling Germany's creeping loss of a culture of excellence. We'll try to unravel how this fundamental shift happened, moving away from really valuing achievement, from embracing responsibility, and from fostering strong, decisive leadership. And crucially, we'll explore potential ways forward, drawing lessons both from Germany's own past and maybe from other successful models. The goal is for you to get a clear, structured understanding of this really complex issue, hopefully filled with those aha moments where you see how seemingly separate things connect, how grand visions can somehow lose their way. Okay, let's unpack this compelling deep dive into a country we've often seen as, the gold standard of efficiency in engineering.
What's truly striking here, and something the sources really hammer home right from the start, is that Germany's current challenges, they aren't really about a lack of intelligence. They're not about a shortage of resources or even just, simple financial problems. Their core argument is that it's something much more fundamental, something rooted deep in its societal fabric. It's about a deep cultural and ideological shift that's had these profound functional consequences. It's about a nation that still undeniably has immense knowledge, a wealth of brilliant minds, significant capabilities. But it has, in many critical ways, lost the systemic ability to turn that raw potential into effective large-scale execution. The knowledge is definitely there, but the doing, the implementation, that's where it's stumbling.
That immediately sets a really thought-provoking tone, doesn't it? Because it shifts our focus away from just blaming, say, economic downturns or political missteps. It forces us to look at something much deeper, much more systemic. It makes you wonder, okay, if the talent and the resources are there, where do these malfunctions first show up? Where does it become visible? And our sources kick right off by showing us exactly where Germany is currently stumbling. They point to these concrete malfunctions in public and economic projects that directly impact daily life. It illustrates this picture of a country with incredible theoretical knowledge, but surprisingly, an inability to consistently execute.
Precisely. The sources make it clear that while Germany absolutely has the intellectual capital, the world-class research institutions, a highly skilled workforce, the overall system seems to actively inhibit the successful execution of complex, ambitious projects. And this isn't just about abstract economic numbers or GDP figures. It's about tangible, really high-profile failures that directly affect citizens, businesses, and Germany's international reputation.
And when we talk about high-profile failures, the first example that just leaps out and is heavily dissected in our sources is the infamous BER airport. the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. It's become less of an airport, really, and more like a monument, maybe a cautionary tale of massive project failure.
Indeed. The BER airport, which finally got going in 2020, opened a staggering 9 years later than originally planned. 9 years. The construction itself dragged on for a painful 14 years, and what started with an initial cost estimate of around $2 billion, which was already, it just ballooned to over $7 billion. The sources are really careful to clarify, though. The problem wasn't a lack of technical engineering know-how. They knew how to build an airport, how to design complex systems. The core issue, they pinpoint, was a critical failure in systemic control and the ability to bundle responsibility.
So wait. It wasn't that engineers didn't know how to design, like, a fire protection system. It was that no single person or group was ultimately responsible for the whole integrated system. That sounds almost crazy for something so critical.
Oh, it truly does. And the fire protection system is highlighted as just a textbook example of this fragmented responsibility. Picture this. You had tons of different planners, various independent inspectors, multiple building authorities, separate operating companies, all working on their own little piece of the puzzle. They were literally working side by side, but without genuinely interconnected mandates. There was no overarching singular coordinator for the system as a whole. And because a complex fire protection system can only be properly tested and certified as one fully integrated unit, and because no single person or entity held that overall responsibility, well, accountability just dissolved. When there's a problem, everyone can point fingers somewhere else. That crucial feedback loop you need for problem solving just breaks down completely. It's a classic case of what they call responsibility diffusion, where accountability gets so diluted it basically vanishes.
Wow. That immediately makes you think of so many challenges we've all probably seen in big, complex projects, right? Where blame just gets shifted around endlessly and the project just grinds to a halt. And it's not just airports, is it? The railway sector, often seen as a symbol of German precision, has its own monument to delay and cost overruns. Stuttgart 21, that huge underground railway project.
Stuttgart 21, very much like BER, has also become this powerful symbol of time and money going way off track. Originally projected at $4.5 billion, the estimates now have soared past $11.5 billion. And even that number comes with acknowledged risks that could push it even higher. Its completion. Initially planned for 2021, it's now pushed back to 2026 at the absolute earliest for just partial operation. Some expert estimates even suggest full functionality might not happen until 2035.
And what did the sources identify as the deeper, sort of systemic issues behind Stuttgart 21's problems, beyond just the obvious delays and the exploding costs?
Well, the sources point to several things compounding each other. Incredibly tough geological conditions there in the Stuttgart Basin, the immense complexity of trying to slot a massive railway hub into a really dense city, and these long, often really difficult political negotiations that stretched over decades. But the fundamental core issue, mirroring BER again, is what they call technical system complexity, especially with the crucial move to these cutting-edge digital signaling systems. Nobody in the initial planning really accounted logically for this huge, holistic, and absolutely mandatory testing requirement. It was treated almost like an afterthought, not a core part of the timeline.
Yeah, it's a classic case of seriously underestimating the hidden complexities, especially when you're dealing with these deeply integrated digital systems. It's not just about laying physical tracks anymore, is it? It's about making sure the complex digital brain running the whole show works perfectly. And then there's Munich's second S-Bahn trunk line, another massive public transport project.
Yes. The Munich project, meant to dramatically improve city transit, also unfortunately follows this exact pattern. Its opening has been delayed from 2028 way out to sometime between 2035 and 2039. And the costs, yep, more than doubled. From an initial $3.85 billion to over $7 billion now. The contributing factors are definitely huge. The extreme depth of the tunnels, going down like 45 meters beneath Munich's incredibly complex city center, integrating new, stricter safety standards that actually changed mid-project. And again, a profound lack of overall coordination and communication between the tech teams and the civil engineering teams. And crucially, just like Stuttgart, there was a severe underestimation of the necessary system testing and approval phases, which were not only underestimated, but also just not clearly communicated to the public from the start.
So whether it's a huge international airport, a complex railway hub, or a vital city transit line, we're seeing these really clear recurring patterns of failure. The sources are very direct about what these patterns are, and they insist this goes way beyond just individual mistakes or isolated bad management.
Absolutely. Despite the unique technical and logistical details of each project, these recurring weaknesses point to clear systemic causes. First, there's a pervasive lack of overall technical responsibility. Our sources highlight that while Germany has tons of highly specialized technical experts, brilliant engineers, skilled technicians, there's this systemic absence of a single person or entity holding comprehensive technical authority for the entire system. Contrast this with historical examples, like Wernher von Braun with the Apollo program. He held that deep, holistic understanding and authority over every single subsystem. He could make informed, decisive calls on complex technical links. This kind of integrated, authoritative leadership is often critically missing in German megaprojects today.
And that lack of a single clear vision seems to immediately connect to the second, equally damaging pattern, the fragmentation of responsibilities.
Precisely. Project structures are typically splintered across this almost dizzying array of different groups. Multiple developers, independent planners, various inspecting bodies, countless suppliers, numerous different public authorities. This inevitably leads to a massive diffusion of responsibility. When everyone just has a small piece, accountability gets spread so thin it effectively dissolves. Decisions are frequently delayed because way too many stakeholders need to sign off. And conflicts between different trades or specialties often just linger unresolved because there's no single empowered system leader to force a resolution. It's a structure almost built for deadlock, not for dynamic action.
So even if the individual parts are incredibly advanced, if there's no one really conducting the orchestra, it just becomes noise. Which leads us straight to the third pattern that sources identify: technological complexity without systemic competence.
Yes. Many modern infrastructure projects rely more and more on highly integrated digital systems, whether it's those IP-based electronic interlockings we talked about, or advanced automation, or intricate fire and security tech that's more software than hardware now. These systems, just by their nature, only work effectively and safely as a cohesive whole. Yet the sources identify this critical gap. A lack of the overarching technological understanding or systemic competence needed to plan, test, and integrate this huge complexity holistically right from the very beginning. There's skill in the individual components, but a big deficit in mastering the intricate interdependencies of the whole system.
And often it seems like they actually start building before they even fully finish the planning,
Yes.
which feels incredibly risky for such complex and expensive projects. That's the fourth pattern: immature planning at project inception.
Indeed. Construction often kicks off, driven by what the sources call political pressure or funding logic, before the planning is truly complete and thoroughly checked. Now, maybe that approach worked for simpler, more modular projects in the past, but it's absolutely disastrous for digitally integrated systems with their sensitive dependencies. The inevitable result is just a cascade of costly changes, endless replanning cycles, and severe, often crippling delays during those critical testing and commissioning phases, where every tiny detail has to be perfect.
And then there's how these projects are presented to the public. The sources call it the illusion of the feasible through political communication.
Yeah, this is a particularly damaging point when it comes to public trust. The public is frequently told these overly optimistic timelines and fixed price tags, which completely ignore the inherent complexities, the unavoidable uncertainties, the dynamic nature of these huge projects. Instead of communicating honestly, maybe using probabilistic ranges like P50 or P80 calculations, which would estimate completion with 50% or 80% certainty, acknowledging risk politicians and project leaders offer these unrealistic, often politically convenient promises. This invariably leads to a profound loss of public trust and growing cynicism when those promises inevitably crumble, which really raises that important question again. How can a country, so technically capable, historically so precise, consistently fall into these same seemingly avoidable traps? It's a pattern that just demands a deeper look.
It truly is a baffling question, isn't it? Because you hear about these massive project failures, and you might think, okay, maybe that's just public infrastructure. Maybe it's uniquely bureaucratic or politically messy.
Right.
But our sources are really clear that this issue goes far beyond public works. It extends right into the heart of Germany's economy, specifically hitting its innovation power.
That's absolutely right. Beyond the big public projects, Germany, despite being undeniably strong as a source of brilliant ideas and groundbreaking research, consistently struggles to translate those ideas into global market leadership, into scalable, world-beating companies. Our sources compellingly argue that Germany is very much a country of inventors but not leaders when it comes to actually commercializing things globally.
Can you give us some specific examples of that? Because that's a really powerful, maybe even uncomfortable statement, especially given Germany's reputation for, making things.
Sure. Consider the MP3 codec, for instance, this audio format we all use. Developed at the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, yet it was mainly U.S. companies like Apple and Spotify that really commercialized it, turning it into billion-dollar global markets, building entire ecosystems around it. Or look at artificial intelligence. German universities, pioneering researchers, they contributed significantly to foundational AI concepts, early research. But today, it's giants like Google, OpenAI, Meta, all U.S. firms that overwhelmingly lead the global market in AI development and application. Even in wind power, where Germany was an early technological leader, an innovator, the current global market leaders are now Vestas from Denmark, Siemens Gamesa from Spain, Goldwind from China. The initial inventive spark is often German, but the commercial scaling, the global dominance, that frequently happens somewhere else.
So the fundamental brain power, the inventive spirit, the core science and engineering talent, it's clearly there. It's thriving within Germany. But the ability to scale those innovations, to globalize them, to foster that entrepreneurial ecosystem that creates world-dominating companies, that seems to be exactly where Germany stumbles, despite its strengths underneath.
Precisely. The underlying issues aren't a lack of raw talent or ingenuity. It's identified as the absence of systemic scaling, a robust entrepreneurial culture, platform logic, and clear, decisive leadership responsibility. German technology is frequently licensed out or maybe integrated into existing, often quite traditional corporate structures, rather than being aggressively globalized and owned by ambitious German startups. Innovation is often managed very carefully within existing frameworks, sometimes risk-averse ones, rather than being championed and scaled up by bold, accountable leaders. That path from prototype to global platform is often missing, or it's just filled with too many internal hurdles.
This brings us to a really crucial interim balance that the sources draw, a powerful summary of this whole first part. Germany has a structural problem, not an intelligence problem. That's a very sharp distinction they make.
That's the absolute core takeaway from this initial section. Germany possesses immense expertise, a wealth of creative minds, deep technical know-how in its people, its components. The deficit isn't in these individual capabilities or the raw brain power. The deficit lies in a functional system. The institutional, the cultural, the leadership frameworks needed to effectively convert that capability into powerful, decisive, successful implementation on a big scale. What's critically missing, according to these sources, is decisive, technically informed leadership. The courage to make tough decisions and actually stick to them. Honest, transparent communication about risks and uncertainties instead of just political promises. Robust ways to scale innovation quickly from a prototype to a global product, and a fundamental trust in competence and personal accountability over rigid, often stifling processes. And these aren't inherent natural deficits, mind you. They're the direct results of specific historical developments, choices, shifts in cultural values that have built up over time.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener? It's about recognizing that a country's real strength isn't just about having smart people or deep pockets or a long history of industry. It's fundamentally about how the entire system, its culture, its institutions, its leadership, empowers those smart people, how it actively fosters excellence, how it embraces necessary risks, and how it truly allows for decisive, accountable leadership to actually happen. And understanding that distinction, that systemic deficit, naturally leads us into our next section, where we need to go back in time a bit. We need to understand what once made Germany so strong, exploring the very foundations that supported its historical success. Okay, let's unpack this historical contrast then. Our sources take us back to a really pivotal time in Germany's history, the post-World War II era. They describe vividly how Germany, really against all odds, rose from the literal rubble of widespread destruction to become a leading industrial nation in just 2 short decades. Now, this wasn't some kind of, mystical miracle, as our sources are quick to point out. Instead, it was the direct, tangible result of this powerful mix of competence, unwavering pragmatism, a deep sense of responsibility, and crucially, a cultural consensus that fundamentally valued performance.
Yes, the economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder of the 50s and 60s, wasn't just luck or some divine intervention. It was meticulously built, driven by this powerful cultural agreement where performance wasn't seen as some burden or an unpleasant task. It was just a matter of course, an ingrained societal expectation. It was just understood that individuals would use their talents, strive hard, and advance through work, education, and showing what they could do.
So it wasn't like a top-down government program forcing people to perform, but more like a deeply embedded, almost invisible cultural norm, a shared understanding of how you contributed.
Exactly. Performance wasn't a political slogan or some corporate buzzword. It was just how society worked, how people approached their jobs, their communities. And this cultural agreement spread through all levels of society. The story of the apprentice rising to factory manager, that wasn't just some romantic myth for PR. It was a real, tangible, socially supported path for upward mobility that countless people genuinely followed. Talent, wherever it popped up, wasn't just recognized, it was actively valued and given space to grow. Gifted designers, incredibly precise engineers, ingenious entrepreneurs, they weren't just skilled individuals. They were seen as essential pillars of society, not some elite group to be suspicious of or hold back. Their contributions were clearly vital for rebuilding the nation.
And this sounds like it stands in pretty stark contrast to today, where talking about performance can sometimes be almost sensitive and even uncomfortable in some contexts.
Absolutely. Today, performance often gets quickly relativized. You hear things like, well, everyone has different strengths, or not everyone needs to be the best, or making comparisons is unfair. What was once a clear incentive and a celebrated achievement in post-war Germany is now sometimes seen as potentially hurtful, a source of discomfort, or even a form of unfair judgment. Back then, the implicit message was strong and clear. Those who could do more should contribute more, and importantly, were allowed to lead more. There was this direct, accepted link between capability, contribution, and leadership.
And a huge defining part of this post-war comeback, the sources stress, was Germany's deep identity as an engineering society. Competence, especially technical competence, was explicitly viewed as national capital.
The term engineer was arguably more central to Germany's self-image in the 50s and 60s than maybe anywhere else. An engineer wasn't just a technician. They were seen as a designer of progress, an architect of the future, someone who literally made tangible things of lasting value through intellect, order, discipline, hard work. This societal respect translated directly into global recognition. German industrial products became synonymous with quality, precision, deep technological substance. This wasn't just clever branding, it was the direct result of a widespread culture where technical excellence held this incredibly high social rank, from the smallest specialized engineering firm right up to the biggest industrial giants.
So that culture wasn't just about making good products then. It was about actively attracting, recognizing, and really nurturing the very best minds, empowering them to drive things forward.
Yes. This culture actively attracted, recognized, fostered, and crucially empowered gifted individuals. They were given the resources, the trust, the platforms to actually implement their ideas. Responsibility wasn't seen as a burden to avoid or a threat to your comfort. It was an honor, a mark of trust, a clear way to make an impact. However, our sources observe that today, this once vibrant engineering culture has somewhat faded. The term itself maybe got more bureaucratic, less hands-on perhaps, and its societal status has become more diffuse. When we talk about a shortage of skilled labor or a lack of innovation today, we rarely stop to ask the deeper questions. Where have the best technical minds gone? Who is still allowed to lead in a truly technical, substantive way, not just because they can moderate a meeting, but because they genuinely understand the subject matter inside out?
And this brings us to another really critical aspect the sources highlight: leadership through competence and the societal acceptance for it. It sounds like there was a very clear, almost automatic connection between deep knowledge and the right to lead.
There was an undeniable, almost self-evident link back then. Those with deep understanding, the people who had actually built things, solved complex technical problems, those with a proven hands-on track record, they were the ones naturally trusted with decisions and leadership roles. Whether it was in industry, public administration, or planning critical infrastructure, genuine technical competence was seen as the absolute prerequisite for leadership responsibility. This stands in sharp contrast to today, where leadership roles are often assigned based on other things: proportionality, social criteria, purely administrative career paths, rather than direct, demonstrable expertise in the subject. Deep technical expertise is now, maybe surprisingly, often dismissed as too operational or too specialized for high-level strategic roles.
So the guiding principle back then was implicitly, whoever decides must also have understood it. They had to really grasp the technical details.
Exactly. Leadership was seen as a concentration of responsibility, a point where deep understanding meant decisive action, not something you outsource or dilute across endless committees. Now, post-war Germany certainly had its own hierarchies and bureaucratic quirks, like any society, but there was this fundamental, deeply ingrained understanding that those making the crucial, high-stakes decisions needed to have a profound, hands-on, often technical grasp of the matter. This highlights a fundamental and really impactful shift. In the past, leadership wasn't just about managing people or processes. It was about mastering the subject and guiding a vision based on that mastery. This raises a really important question for any modern society, right? Can true transformative progress actually happen without that kind of technical depth right at the top of the decision-making structures?
And how did the education system fit into this? Or was it also meticulously focused on fostering and identifying this kind of competence and ambition?
Yes, very much so. In the 50s and 60s, education wasn't just about acquiring knowledge. It was deeply embedded as a primary, socially accepted, and incredibly powerful route to social and economic advancement. The stories of a worker on the second educational path, someone from a working class background getting higher education later, or a master craftsman's child going to grammar school. These weren't just nice anecdotes, they were real, tangible biographies, actual pathways to moving up. And this upward mobility wasn't achieved by a system that tried to level everyone down or ignore individual differences. Instead, the system deliberately recognized and actively fostered differences in ability. Those who showed exceptional capability were actively encouraged and supported to advance. And once they did, they were expected to perform at their highest level. This was seen as a form of meritocratic justice, a fair system for society to progress, rather than just a blanket attempt at enforced sameness.
So it sounds like the focus was squarely on recognizing and cultivating individual potential, leveraging unique strengths rather than trying to squeeze everyone into the same box or hit some uniform standard.
Precisely. Today, the pendulum has swung quite significantly in the other direction. The goal is often for everyone to achieve similar degrees or qualifications, regardless of inherent performance differences or individual talents. Now, while this sounds equitable, maybe well-intentioned on the surface, the sources argue it has an unintended consequence. It leads to a subtle but pervasive devaluation of true excellence and, ironically, an undermining of highly valuable vocational careers too. Abstract competencies and standardized frameworks often replace the kind of practical, hands-on, or deep engineering paths that once led to significant upward mobility, rarely offering the same opportunities seen decades ago.
It's clear then that the success of that post-war era wasn't just about a quick rebound or sheer necessity driving everyone. Our sources identify three core interconnected pillars that explain why it worked so powerfully then and why, by contrast, it's proving so challenging today.
Correct. The sources highlight that Germany's remarkable economic rise was built on three foundational, mutually reinforcing principles. First, talent was actively sought out, consistently recognized, and rigorously fostered. It was never relativized. Gifted individuals were identified, given opportunities, and their unique abilities were celebrated as an invaluable societal asset, a resource for collective progress. Second, leadership was deeply technically founded and genuinely responsible, not diffusely distributed and merely managed through committees. Those in charge had a profound, hands-on understanding of the subject matter and were held directly accountable for outcomes. There was a clear, singular point of ultimate responsibility. And third, performance was profoundly socially respected and politically demanded. It was never reinterpreted, dismissed, or suppressed. There was a pervasive societal expectation and a genuine appreciation for achievement and demonstrable results.
And the crucial point, which ties directly into Germany's current struggles, is that this entire cohesive culture was built on a broad societal consensus that has since been, well, largely lost.
Exactly. This powerful, cohesive cultural framework didn't just materialize, it was sustained by a broad, implicit societal agreement on these fundamental values. Our sources argue, quite forcefully, that the dissolution of this consensus, particularly starting around the 1970s, represents a deeper, more fundamental ideological shift. And this shift continues to ripple through and, in many ways, cripple the German system today, explaining the systemic issues we see now.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener? It means understanding that the current challenges we see, the project failures, the innovation struggles, that sense of stagnation, aren't just technical glitches or isolated policy mistakes. They are, in fact, symptoms of a much deeper cultural and philosophical change, a shift in core values that began decades ago. And it continues to reverberate through every aspect of the nation's capabilities and its capacity for action. And that brings us directly to the next crucial section of our deep dive. Looking closely at exactly how these ideological shifts of the 1970s reshaped Germany's very fabric. The 1970s indeed marked a truly profound cultural change, not just within Germany, but echoing across many Western societies. It was a turbulent and transformative decade, wasn't it? A time of intense questioning of authority, challenging established hierarchies, pushing for new societal norms from student movements to early environmentalism and new ideas about social justice. Now, while many of these shifts were undoubtedly necessary corrections to more rigid, sometimes overly authoritarian structures of the past, our sources contend that this period also inadvertently led to a significant loss of differentiation.
That's a critical nuance that the sources really emphasize. They illustrate that during this period, particularly in Germany, performance itself increasingly became suspect. Excellence started getting labeled as elitist. Even just acknowledging individual differences in ability became uncomfortable. Now, this was a gradual, almost imperceptible process. It wasn't like some official decree, but it deeply embedded itself in mindsets, in teaching guidelines, in institutional logic, even corporate philosophies. It subtly but profoundly reshaped the very core of Germany's operating system.
So a well-intentioned, arguably necessary push for greater equality, for more social justice, began to kind of morph into something else, an ideology suggesting everyone can and perhaps should do everything.
Precisely. What started as a commendable goal of emancipation, aiming for truly equal opportunity, broader access to education for everyone, greater social participation in many areas transformed into an ideology where individual differences in ability were no longer seen as a natural reality to harness or a resource to cultivate. Instead, they were often seen as a problem to be corrected or even a source of injustice. The prevailing pedagogical and societal guideline became basically every person can learn everything. Differences in abilities are mainly due to socialization or external factors, not inherent talent or aptitude.
Wow, that's a radical philosophical shift with potentially massive consequences. What were the practical day-to-day results of that viewpoint on the ground?
The consequences, as highlighted vividly in the sources, were indeed far-reaching and often counterproductive. Performance differences, instead of being recognized as natural variations, started being viewed as deficits to be compensated for, implying a flaw in the system or the individual that needed fixing. Giftedness, rather than being openly recognized and enthusiastically promoted as a societal asset, was often psychologized, almost pathologized, becoming something to be carefully managed rather than celebrated. And effort itself, traditionally seen as a virtue, was less often praised and sometimes even seen as indicating system failure. The implicit thought being, if someone has to try that hard, something must be wrong with the system or the task. What was profoundly lost in this transformation was the fundamental understanding that talent is real, it is unevenly distributed, but it's immensely socially productive and beneficial if it's openly recognized, diligently nurtured, and allowed to flourish.
And that profound shift in thinking about individual ability seems to naturally lead to the next point, the retreat of excellence from public responsibility. If individual differences in high performance are viewed with suspicion, what happens to the very idea of excellence in leadership?
It becomes tainted, even stigmatized. Technical excellence, profound leadership competence, intellectual clarity, the ability to make sharp decisions, these qualities, once highly valued, were increasingly labeled elitist. And elitist acquired this predominantly negative exclusionary connotation. In numerous public institutions, the previous merit-based focus on genuine excellence was gradually, almost subtly, replaced by a primary focus on diversity, representation, and social balance when filling leadership roles. Now, while diversity and representation are undeniably crucial and laudable goals in any modern society, the sources argue that when they become the primary or sometimes sole criteria, overshadowing foundational competence, genuine ability, and a track record of performance, critical responsibility vacuums inevitably start to emerge. The focus shifts from who is best suited to lead this complex task to who fits this particular demographic slot.
And pointing this out then became a problem itself. It sounds like it created a difficult environment to even raise these concerns.
Yes, the sources note quite critically that anyone who dared to question this trend, anyone who insisted on competence as a main criterion, risked being quickly labeled backward, undemocratic, or even discriminatory. The visible outcomes of this shift are stark and, as we've seen, functionally debilitating. A systemic lack of integrated, overall technical responsibility in major public projects, procurement processes that increasingly favor formal compliance and bureaucratic box-ticking over the genuinely most capable providers, crucial decisions endlessly moderated through consensus-seeking rather than decisively led by competent individuals. This fundamental loss of expert leadership authority is particularly fatal for executing highly complex technical systems, whether it's massive rail projects, the intricate energy transition, or large-scale digitalization. The sources conclude it effectively renders Germany systemically unable to act when faced with these complex, interdependent challenges, because the mechanisms for decisive informed action have just weakened.
This philosophical shift clearly seeped into the very core of the education system too, leading to a new educational culture that was, in the source's words, against comparison, against difference.
The education system was indeed profoundly and comprehensively affected. From the 70s onward, there was this deliberate ideological shift away from focusing on performance, differentiation, meritocracy, towards an overriding emphasis on promotion for all and an almost absolute equality. The sources state this was initially well-intentioned, born out of a desire for greater fairness and access, but often poorly executed in practice. Key changes included grades being relativized, where explicit performance comparisons between students were labeled performance hostile, discouraging competition. Even youth sports competitions were increasingly criticized or changed to avoid highlighting differences between more or less athletically gifted kids, seemingly to protect self-esteem.
And this sounds like it created a really challenging, maybe even stifling environment for high-achieving, ambitious students who actually needed to be pushed and challenged.
It certainly did. The concept of inclusion, while a noble and necessary goal in principle, was often implemented without enough resources, without clear pedagogical goals, and frequently, as the sources argue, at the direct expense of high-achieving students whose intellectual needs were often unmet or even actively held back. Similarly, the gymnasium, Germany's traditional selective grammar school system that historically fed the intellectual top tier, increasingly became a mass model, losing its specific focus on identifying, nurturing, and accelerating high intellectual potential. The overall result, the sources conclude, is an education system less focused on fostering and celebrating excellence, and more on abstract competency frameworks, vague ideas of educational equity, and generalized individualized support. The systemic question of how to actually identify, support, and develop the future drivers of technical progress, the future engineers and innovators, that became chronically neglected, almost by design.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, beyond just Germany? It's about recognizing that seemingly small changes in philosophy, even those driven by really good intentions, can have profound, far-reaching, and often unintended long-term effects on a nation's core capabilities, its innovative capacity, its overall competitiveness, especially in a tough global landscape. And this pervasive ideological shift also fundamentally changed how leadership itself was perceived, and more critically, how it was actually practiced.
Absolutely. A distinctly new leadership paradigm took hold in public administration and politics, and increasingly within the German business world too. It consistently prioritized achieving consensus over making decisive action. It valued coordination among many stakeholders over clear individual responsibility. The practical consequences are tangible and everywhere. Crucial decisions are often talked to death, endlessly discussed and watered down across numerous committees to avoid disadvantaging anyone or upsetting any group. Responsibility gets diffused across so many shoulders that ultimately no single person is truly accountable for the outcome. And leaders, instead of providing substantive, directive guidance, tend to primarily moderate discussions and facilitate compromises rather than offering bold, vision-driven leadership.
It truly sounds like a situation where everyone's involved in the process, but nobody's really in charge of the result. It's decision by committee, without a clear captain steering the ship.
Precisely. You see this vividly in project committees that critically lack real technical leadership and decisive authority. You see it in government agencies where decision timelines stretch way beyond any economic sense. You even see it, as the sources put it, in schools where no one is allowed to say that wasn't good enough. Crucially, particularly with large, highly complex projects, decision-makers often sadly lack the necessary technical depth or hands-on understanding to spot systemic errors early on. This just makes problems like those at Stuttgart 21 or the Munich S-Bahn worse. By the time the problems become obvious, they're already deeply rooted and exponentially more expensive to fix.
This analysis brings us to a really stark and incredibly insightful interim balance from our sources. They argue that these well-intended ideological shifts have actually become a structural risk for Germany.
This is a powerful and unsettling conclusion they draw. The ideologies that gained such prominence from the 70s onwards weren't fundamentally born from malice or bad intentions. They genuinely came from a noble desire for more participation, more equality, more justice in society. However, what the sources call their radical absolutization, pushing these ideals to an extreme without balancing other principles, led to this societal paradox. Germany, as a society, became increasingly reluctant to openly acknowledge and celebrate talent. It started assigning leadership based on criteria other than core competence or proven merit. It largely stopped openly demanding high performance across the board, and it allowed technical excellence to become institutionally underrepresented, even subtly marginalized. Now, this isn't meant as a moral judgment on the values themselves, but rather as a rigorous functional analysis. Germany, through this profound collective mental and cultural shift, has inadvertently and structurally undermined its own performance capabilities, particularly in the very areas it once completely dominated.
That's a heavy thought to process. If these good intentions inadvertently created such deep structural problems, it naturally makes you wonder how other nations handled similar cultural shifts, or if maybe they took a fundamentally different path. And that leads us directly to our next section, where we draw a really compelling comparison between Germany's path and that of the United States. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and provides a powerful counterstory. Our sources suggest that while Germany moved increasingly towards norms emphasizing equality and social balance, the United States, in many crucial ways, continued to prioritize, maybe even actively amplify, the pursuit of excellence, the embrace of personal responsibility, and this relentless focus on entrepreneurial scaling. The tangible result: a vast majority of today's globally leading technologies, platforms, and transformative companies emerge from the U.S. Our sources are absolutely clear on this point. This isn't about idealizing the USA or suggesting one culture is inherently better. It's about rigorously learning from fundamental systemic differences that have just produced profoundly different outcomes.
Indeed. The comparison isn't about making a value judgment on one culture versus another. It's about rigorously contrasting the operational philosophies and societal priorities that have, over decades, yielded distinct results. In the USA, the culture of excellence isn't just present. It's deeply ingrained, widely accepted, and profoundly socially legitimate. Top performance isn't just tolerated, it's openly accepted, celebrated, often even lionized.
You see that so clearly in their top universities, don't you? Places like MIT, Stanford, Caltech. They don't just talk about equal opportunity. They explicitly advertise and compete based on excellence, on being at the absolute cutting edge.
Exactly. These institutions actively market themselves as places for the best of the best, attracting global talent. The explicit goal of being the top in academic, scientific, or technical fields is seen as this incredibly powerful motivator, not some taboo you whisper about. And this has widespread consequences across society. Gifted children are identified and nurtured early, often through specialized programs, rather than being held back for uniformity. Universities and companies fiercely compete for the brightest minds rather than being constrained by social compromises or quotas. And the term elite often functions as a promise of quality, a benchmark for achievement, rather than an insult or something negative. There's a widespread belief that fostering the best actually lifts everyone up.
This sounds like a really stark contrast to Germany's approach to leadership, too, particularly this idea of leadership by doers in the U.S.
Yes. In many American projects and organizations, there's this clear, almost inherent understanding. The person in charge decides, and they are then directly and comprehensively accountable for the outcome. You can see this in contemporary figures like Elon Musk. His almost singular decisiveness, his willingness to take massive, often existential risks that was absolutely fundamental to the very existence and success of companies like SpaceX and Tesla. His approach, while often controversial, maybe prone to drama, embodies this highly concentrated, singular, and ultimately accountable leadership model.
And the sources bring up an incredible historical example that embodies this kind of singular, technically deep leadership: Wernher von Braun and the Apollo program.
A truly perfect illustration of leadership by doers. Von Braun wasn't just a figurehead or a charismatic spokesperson or some detached administrator. He was the undisputed technical overall responsible leader. He possessed this incredibly deep, almost encyclopedic understanding of every single subsystem in the monumental Saturn V rocket, from propulsion to guidance computers. He didn't just know what was needed, he knew how it was built, why it worked, how to fix it. His leadership was rooted in undeniable technical authority, comprehensive understanding, and the absolute trust his expertise demanded. The sources point out that such personalities combining deep technical mastery with decisive leadership are sadly often not found, actively sought, or systematically fostered in Germany today. Or worse, they're even structurally prevented from rising to such critical roles.
So it's not just about inventing brilliant things, it's about turning those inventions into massive, transformative, world-changing businesses. That's the art of scaling, and it seems to be a distinct American strength.
This is indeed a core, almost defining strength of the U.S. innovation ecosystem. While many groundbreaking scientific ideas and prototypes originate in Europe, including Germany, the U.S. possesses this unparalleled, consistent ability to scale these ideas into global companies, vast digital platforms, entirely new markets. Took the MP3 standard again. Developed in Germany, but commercialized into a global, multi-billion-dollar phenomenon in the US, creating whole industries. Modern AI architectures. Foundational theoretical work often came from European and German researchers, but they're now overwhelmingly dominated by US giants like Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, NVIDIA, who built vast commercial ecosystems around them. Outside of a few legacy giants like SAP, Germany critically lacks global leaders in generative AI, cloud platforms, or cutting-edge chip development.
So Germany invents it, but it doesn't seem to grow it into a global giant.
Precisely. In the US, excellence is inherently entrepreneurial. Technologically leading individuals are often encouraged, empowered to found companies, to aggressively chase funding from a robust venture capital scene, to take significant financial and personal risks, and then to rapidly scale those ventures globally. The culture embraces rapid growth, even failure as a learning step. In Germany, the prevalent model tends to be different. The invention is often handed over to a large, often established corporation or a public authority to be managed, rather than being aggressively championed as a new disruptive venture. The consequence: Germany is often the intellectual birthplace of groundbreaking tech, but rarely the place where it achieves massive, large-scale global application and market dominance.
And this striking difference in approach extends even to the educational ideal. The U.S., despite its own flaws, seems to foster a different kind of diversity and drive than what we see emerging in Germany.
The sources highlight that while the American education system is certainly far from perfect, faces its own big challenges. It is fundamentally characterized by a high degree of diversity and a strong performance-oriented approach. Alongside public high schools, you have a wide array of specialized magnet schools, competitive private schools, a vast network of diverse universities, community colleges. Crucially, there's a palpable culture of competition where performance visibly, tangibly pays off through scholarships, elite university spots, career opportunities. Gifted kids have robust access to gifted programs, specialized summer camps, tech competitions, many privately funded, but crucially socially accepted and celebrated. Technical interest, ambition are actively nurtured, propelled forward, rather than being diluted or held back for some abstract social balance.
And the contrast with the current German system.
In Germany, as we discussed, education has increasingly become standardized. The prevailing philosophy often suggests everyone should achieve roughly the same outcomes. Explicit comparisons are actively avoided. Differences in ability or achievement are often perceived as injustices to be fixed, rather than strengths to be cultivated. The consequence, our sources argue, is that genuine excellence often becomes invisible, goes unrecognized, and is frequently unused or even suppressed, ultimately harming the collective potential.
So the interim balance here is incredibly powerful. Germany can change if it truly wants to. These systemic differences aren't fixed laws of nature. They are the outcomes of choices made over time.
Absolutely. The rigorous comparison with the USA isn't about saying one culture is inherently superior or flawless. It's about starkly illustrating systemic differences that are the direct result of conscious, accumulated political, cultural, institutional decisions made over decades. The sources provide a really clear, concise table summarizing these distinctions, which is incredibly insightful. For excellence, in the USA, broadly socially legitimized, celebrated. In Germany, often viewed with suspicion, labeled elitist. For leadership, USA tends to be person-centric, decisive, risk-taking. Germany, more committee-based, consensus-seeking, often risk-averse. For innovation, USA is aggressively scaling-oriented, focused on global markets. Germany often prototype-focused, content with invention over commercialization. For responsibility, USA typically clearly assigned to individuals. Germany often diffusely distributed across many groups. For education, USA's system is differentiating, diverse, fostering individual talent. Germany's increasingly standardized, equalizing, aiming for uniform outcomes. And for technical overall management, USA, often rigorously technically staffed, like von Braun. Germany, frequently formally staffed, prioritizing administrative skills over deep technical insight. The profound conclusion is that these are not immutable laws or inherent national traits. They are adjustable outcomes of past choices. This raises an incredibly important question for Germany. If these differences aren't inherent, if they are the product of decisions, then what concrete, actionable steps can actually be taken to fundamentally reverse this trend and unlock its latent potential?
And that leads us perfectly and really urgently into the final critical section of our deep dive. Our sources move definitively from this rigorous diagnosis of Germany's challenges to a clear, prescriptive outline. They give us concrete, actionable insights to precisely how Germany can move forward. This isn't just calling for small adjustments or minor policy changes. It's about nothing less than reinventing Germany itself, or maybe rediscovering its lost strengths. So what does this all mean for us, the listener? Our sources move from analysis to prescription, giving us a kind of roadmap.
The document doesn't shy away from the urgency here. Germany, they state, is unequivocally at a critical turning point. The symptoms of stagnation are glaringly clear, from an overwhelmed public administration struggling with basic services, to a noticeable loss of innovation leadership globally, and this pervasive, growing loss of public trust in its own ability to execute big projects. The scandal, as the sources put it quite bluntly, isn't a lack of awareness. It's the stark reality of knowing exactly what's wrong, but consistently doing too little, or doing it too slowly. This final section is an imperative, detailing not just the concrete actions and structures needed, but crucially, the fundamental mindsets and the types of people required to drive this profound change.
So what the sources propose as the single core missing element, it isn't technology or money or even raw intelligence. It's a consistently practiced and deeply ingrained culture of responsibility.
Precisely. The endemic failures in those massive public projects like BER, Stuttgart 21, the Munich S-Bahn, as we've discussed, they stem directly from this pervasive fragmentation of responsibility. In these scenarios, too many voices contribute, too few individuals are empowered or willing to make decisive choices, and tragically, hardly anyone bears significant reputational or professional consequences for failure. Contrast this again with historical figures like Wernher von Braun. He not only conceptualized and drove the vision for Apollo, but personally carried immense overall responsibility. He had that profound understanding of every intricate detail, knowing a single overlooked failure could doom the entire mission, and thus his reputation.
And what specifically needs to change to bring that kind of concentrated, meaningful responsibility back into the system today?
Our sources are remarkably explicit on this. First, critical technical leadership roles must once again be consistently filled with individuals who possess genuine, demonstrable technical excellence and profound, hands-on understanding, not just administrative skills. Second, project managers must be truly empowered as decisive decision-makers with real technical authority, rather than just acting as event managers who coordinate without ultimate power. Furthermore, decision-making roles within administration and politics should be assigned based strictly on suitability and proven competence, moving away from criteria like party affiliation, quotas, or that forced lowest common denominator consensus. The core principle must be fundamentally re-embraced. Responsibility is not delegable. It begins with understanding and does not end until the full assessment of risk, including personal reputational risk, is accepted.
This also inherently means making performance visible again, essentially rehabilitating the very concept of excellence. If everyone is sort of deemed equal, it becomes incredibly hard, maybe even socially awkward, to distinguish and reward the exceptional.
The sources forcefully argue that decades of adhering to this overly egalitarian belief, the notion that all abilities are basically equal, differences are just due to external factors, has led to a pervasive equalization. And paradoxically, this hinders and even punishes the best and brightest. In the current German education system, for example, high performance is often viewed skeptically, almost like it's an unfair advantage. Promoting excellence is frequently labeled elitist. Rigorous selection processes are often seen as cold, unfeeling, even inhumane.
But the sources say the opposite is actually true, that this approach harms overall quality.
Exactly. They assert that a societal inability or unwillingness to differentiate based on performance ultimately leads to a profound systemic loss of quality across the board. A lack of demand for high standards and challenging achievement inevitably results in their erosion, and a failure to actively identify and promote giftedness means a collective loss of future potential as untapped talent just fades away. What's critically needed, they state, is a return to an honest concept of performance, not one designed to divide society or create elites, but one that functions as a natural mechanism for society to grow, thrive, and contribute meaningfully.
And a crucial part of that growth, especially given Germany's historical strengths, is finally scaling innovation. Germany has this undeniable history of inventing, of pioneering, but also this perplexing pattern of missing the big commercial breakthrough.
It's indeed the land of missed breakthroughs, as the sources vividly put it. Germany invented MP3, made foundational contributions to early AI, pioneered many basic mobility technologies. Yet, for these and countless other innovations, it consistently failed to create world-leading companies or global platforms from its own inventions. Why? The sources pinpoint several reasons. The invention itself was often wrongly seen as the end goal, not just the starting point for a commercial journey. Spin-offs from research institutions were often hindered by bureaucracy or cultural risk aversion. The entrepreneurial spirit was systematically stifled. The risks of starting a new venture were often demonized, rather than accepted as part of the game. Consequently, those with real entrepreneurial drive often couldn't act effectively within Germany or, sadly, felt compelled to take their ideas and talents elsewhere.
So what concrete steps are proposed to break this cycle and foster a true scaling culture? How do you actually do that?
The call is emphatic for establishing dynamic technology centers, where cutting-edge research, ambitious entrepreneurship, and readily available venture capital all come together, effectively creating MITs instead of mediocrity. This means not just more research labs, but integrated ecosystems built for commercialization. There's a clear need for state-funded but critically privately managed startup funds that focus aggressively on high potential and scalability, not bureaucratic formalities or avoiding risk. Fast-track procedures for attracting and integrating top foreign talent are essential to inject new energy. And crucially, the sources propose designating administrative special zones for highly innovative projects or high-tech spin-offs, where crippling bureaucracy, excessive regulations, and long approval times are significantly reduced or just bypassed altogether. The mantra for innovation, they declare, must shift from just thinking about doing to actively doing instead of just thinking.
And for those massive, complex infrastructure projects we started with the BERs and Stuttgart 21s, how does Germany actually execute them with proper planning, depth, and consistency, avoiding those past failures?
The sources offer a sobering but clear assessment. Large projects don't ultimately fail because of a lack of courage or even technical skill. They overwhelmingly fail due to a profound lack of methodical rigor and systemic project management. BER, Stuttgart 21, Munich's S-Bahn, they all shared strikingly similar failure patterns. No robust, transparent business case at the start, no rigorous maturity checks before construction began, no clear independent separation of the developer, planner, and operator roles, and critically, no single entity exercising decisive technical overall responsibility.
What are the models of success then? What could Germany look to for these kinds of projects?
Well, the James Webb Space Telescope, for instance, serves as a powerful global example. It was a project of immense complexity, huge cost, with literally only one shot at success once it launched. It succeeded not just through brilliant science, but because of rigorous technical leadership, strict maturity models that mandated readiness checks at every stage, the use of independent challenger or red teams to actively find flaws, and an unwavering mission-first focus that cut through red tape. Germany needs to adopt similar robust practices, implementing strict stage-gate models with binding stop-or-go points, mandating a standardized business case template with transparent P50, P80 probabilistic costs and schedule calculations for realistic expectations, appointing a chief engineer with ultimate decisive decision-making power, and implementing comprehensive digital project management using advanced tools like BIM, building information modeling, for detailed digital models, earned value management to track real progress against budget, all supported by open, visible risk registers. The powerful message is clear. Large projects do not have to fail if they are taken seriously and managed with disciplined rigor.
This all sounds like a monumental structural and procedural overhaul, but our sources strongly suggest that the biggest hurdle might actually be a mental one. This insidious idea that leadership itself must no longer be suspect.
This is perhaps the most profound and therefore the most challenging shift required. The sources describe it as the fear of one's own excellence. Germany, they argue, has grown uncomfortably accustomed to relativizing its successes, subtly hiding its competence, and deeply distrusting strong, decisive leadership. The hard reality, however, is that no country becomes competitive or builds a future through a feel-good atmosphere alone. Tunnels aren't built through endless debates or unanimous consensus. Inventions don't become global brands if no one dares to build them, fund them, and lead them to market.
So it's about shifting a collective mindset, not just changing a policy. It's about a cultural recalibration, really.
Exactly. A fundamental mental transformation is needed where performance is once again publicly visible, openly acknowledged, genuinely celebrated. Leadership must be re-understood and re-embraced as a vital service and a profound responsibility, not just a display of personal power or privilege. And crucially, strength and capability must be allowed to exist and be demonstrated without shame or false modesty, but always, always with genuine humility. The call to action for leaders, both present and future, is powerful and direct. Whoever wants to lead must be allowed to, and whoever is allowed to lead must do it decisively and responsibly. If we connect this to the broader picture, this kind of mental and cultural shift is perhaps the most challenging because it asks us to reevaluate our deepest societal instincts and biases. But it is also, without a doubt, the most fundamental and necessary for long-term change.
To enable this kind of huge change across a whole nation, our sources go beyond just high-level principles. They detail concrete, systemic levers that can be pulled across different sectors. This isn't just theory, it's truly a practical roadmap for action.
Indeed. For projects, the sources mandate that every large public project must have a robust, mandatory business case scrutinizing its viability before any political decision is even made. They advocate for rigorous stage-gate processes with explicit exit options if performance targets aren't met. Technical overall responsibility must be explicitly named and visible to everyone involved. And transparency should be enforced through open-book calculations, independent red team reviews to find flaws, and using earned value methods for real-time progress tracking.
And for fostering a really vibrant innovation ecosystem.
For innovation, it involves creating more practical, market-oriented technology transfer centers, maybe like Fraunhofer, but with a stronger mandate for commercialization and spin-offs. Establishing bold innovation funds specifically for risky startups, recognizing most will fail, but the few big successes can be transformative. Implementing venture talent programs designed to attract and fast-track top foreign professionals and entrepreneurs. Furthermore, designating administrative special zones for high-tech spin-offs and innovative ventures, where bureaucracy and regulatory burdens are significantly reduced to speed things up.
What about education? That seems so central to cultivating future talent and that performance mindset.
Absolutely. The proposals here include actively implementing excellent schools and robust gifted programs that identify and nurture high potential right from an early age. A fundamental pedagogical reorientation is needed to focus on fostering talent in challenging students, rather than just protecting them or ensuring everyone finishes at the same level. Curricula should be updated to place a strong emphasis on technology, entrepreneurship, and personal responsibility. Finally, the strategic use of digital education platforms with AI-supported individualization is crucial to recognize and nurture individual strengths and learning styles, letting students advance at their own pace.
And for the very backbone of the nation, the administration itself, how does that need to change?
It calls for a radical shift in leadership appointments, ensuring they're based strictly on qualification and proving suitability, moving decisively away from party politics or social quotas. Deep technical expertise needs to be explicitly embedded and empowered within ministries, not just outsourced to consultants. And a digital Germany dashboard should be established for transparent, real-time tracking of goals and progress across government, fostering clear accountability and public trust.
All these changes are profound, and they clearly need champions. So who should drive this? What are the paths to actually starting such a widespread transformation? The sources lay out two main paths, or maybe even a crucial sequence.
The sources are unequivocal. This kind of fundamental systemic change will not happen automatically or just organically. It absolutely needs committed drivers, champions willing to push against the way things are. Path 1 is to actively seek out and empower the silent excellences. These highly capable individuals exist in Germany, brilliant engineers, decisive managers, visionary entrepreneurs, but they're often invisible, stifled, or pushed aside by the current system and its cultural biases. They must be actively found, rigorously fostered, and critically allowed to lead with genuine authority. And perhaps most importantly, they need protection from the very system that currently eats them or grinds them down. Path 2 is to realign society as a whole. This means key societal institutions, schools, the media, political leadership must collectively and consistently recommunicate performance as a fundamental value, not a suspect one. Leadership must again be seen as a respected aspirational role model embodying competence and responsibility. And fundamentally, strength and capability should be allowed to exist and be shown without shame, but always, always with profound humility.
And there's a third option, maybe, or perhaps a pragmatic sequence that combines these two paths for actually making it happen.
Yes, it's the willing first then the change approach. This suggests a phased practical way forward. First, identify and foster the capable individuals, those silent excellences. Second, empower them and proactively change the structures and processes that currently block them or stifle their ideas. And third, through these tangible actions, truly transform the underlying culture, building momentum through actual success. It begins not with a flood of money or grand speeches, but with a renewed sense of courage, a willingness to challenge ingrained habits.
This raises a really important question for you, the listener, as you reflect on your own experiences. Where do you see these silent excellences operating in your own field, in your own community, maybe even within yourself? And how can we collectively advocate for this kind of societal realignment, shifting our own views on performance, leadership, and that crucial balance between equality and excellence? It's a question of applying these insights far beyond just Germany's situation. As we wrap up this truly insightful deep dive, it's abundantly clear that Germany, a nation once admired globally for its efficiency in engineering, stands at a profound crossroads. Our journey has taken us from identifying the stark symptoms of stagnation in its major projects and innovation to understanding the deep historical roots and those significant ideological shifts of the 70s that inadvertently led here. We then drew powerful yet nuanced lessons from contrasting it with the United States, and finally, we've laid out concrete, actionable pathways for Germany's revitalization, its reascent.
This rigorous and complex analysis culminates in a truly optimistic yet realistic vision for Germany in 2040. The sources paint this compelling picture where the country functions again not perfectly, because perfection is an illusion, but reliably. Imagine punctual trains, digitalized and efficient public agencies, secure and sustainable energy, growing innovative businesses, schools that genuinely challenge, foster, and elevate every student's talent. But perhaps most importantly, a future where the German people once again wholeheartedly believe in what their country can truly achieve, where that collective self-doubt has been replaced by quiet confidence.
The sources are quick to point out, though, that this journey from stagnation back to vitality won't be easy or automatic. It requires profound honesty about where things are now, a tenacious commitment to action over endless analysis, decisive leadership over protracted debate, and the courage to foster what truly supports progress while letting go of what demonstrably holds it back. It's about rediscovering fundamental principles that were once core. Understanding responsibility is far more than just a title, that technology is a powerful enabler, not just a risk, and that excellence is a vital service to everyone, a contribution, not arrogance.
Crucially, the reascent, they argue, won't fundamentally begin with massive amounts of money or new grand policies alone. It starts with a profound internal change in thinking. It demands the courage to genuinely want to be better again, a renewed and deep trust that capable people can and absolutely should lead, and a collective willingness to finally abandon the excuses and truly embrace responsibility for outcomes. The sources provocatively ask, in a way that resonates far beyond Germany, what would happen if we stopped belittling ourselves? What if we wanted to be better again, not out of arrogance or some desire for dominance, but out of a profound conviction in our own capabilities and a commitment to service?
And the answer they offer in their vision lies in re-embracing new yet timeless principles: courage, reliability, competence, and an unwavering trust in what's truly possible when these elements come together.
The greatest miracle, they suggest, might ultimately be that a country that had almost forgotten how to believe in itself did not reinvent itself entirely, but courageously rediscovered its own fundamental strengths and principles. The profound challenge now, they conclude, is to diligently preserve this rediscovered potential. Not through passive hope, but through daily decisions, through the unwavering practice of excellence in everything, and through humility in accepting and carrying true responsibility. Germany, 2040, they state, isn't presented as a perfect country, but as one that is possible again. A country that does not shy away from challenges, but moves forward with resolve. A country that dares to be good.
A truly thought-provoking deep dive into what makes nations, and really any large system, whether it's a company, a community, or even a personal project, truly tick and thrive. It compels us to consider how deeply intertwined our collective culture, our leadership styles, even our individual mindsets are with our ability to innovate, to execute, and ultimately to succeed. Thank you for joining us on this illuminating exploration.
And thank you, our listener, for engaging with these critical questions. Understanding these underlying dynamics, the interplay of culture, competence, accountability, it's not just an academic exercise. It is the absolutely vital first step towards meaningful change, not just for a nation grappling with its identity, but perhaps for any endeavor where vision, talent, and reality must somehow converge to build something lasting and impactful. As we consider Germany's path, it really compels us all to ask, what culture of excellence are we actually fostering in our own communities, our own organizations, maybe even within ourselves? And what might truly be possible if we dare to believe in, seek out, and truly enable excellence in all its forms without fear or false modesty?